Hi, this is Mr. Minnick, introducing to you folks the 3 Steps project, which is typically the first project that my Visual Basic students do here at Wyomissing. So folks, click on New Project. I believe the specs for this assignment tell you to name the project 3 Steps. So I'm typing the name 3 Steps. I don't like to use spaces in the names of projects. And I capitalized the T and the S so that it's more readable. I click OK, and that gives me an empty project with an empty interface there for Form 1. According to the specs, I need to create a label here at the top called LBL header. So to create a label, you come over here to your toolbox, which may or may not be pinned down there. If you don't see your toolbox, hold your mouse over toolbox and then pin it to the side. Anyway, label is, under the letter L. Double click and then drag your label somewhere towards the top center. When you put something called an object, all these things over here in the toolbox are called objects. When you put an object on your interface, you should immediately name it. Just like if you ever have a child, you should immediately name it. The name of this object here is label 1, and we want to change that. So over here in the bottom right window, it's called the Properties window, you see. Scroll up to what's called the Name property. You'll see the word name in parentheses. They put name here above all the properties with the letter A. And click in there next to it and delete label 1. No child wants to be named label 1. And in this case, name it LBL header. The LBL is a prefix. And for labels, we should always use LBL. The word header should have a capital H in it. Again, no spaces are ever allowed in the name of an object. Okay, so after naming the object, I slide down here in the property window, and I'm going to change its text property. Down here under the T's, you find a property called text. Delete the word label 1 there, and type in 3 steps again. Just like we named the project, but put a space in. 3 steps with a space, and a capital T and an S for good grammar. Now, when you either hit the Enter key on your keyboard or just click somewhere else, you'll see that the label does say 3 steps. Let's review. The name of this object, if you click it again to select it, the name up here is LBL header, but the text property is 3 steps. You know what? That looks boring. Let's bump it up a font size or 2. So let's scroll up to the font property, F, font, and click next to the word font, and change the font from Microsoft Sans Serif to something interesting. Pick something of your choice. I'm going to pick Broadway, and I'm going to make it bold. And I'm going to change the font size to say 26 and click OK. So there you go, recentering the label, and there it looks a lot better. So far we are on target, and now we must make our first button. This thing right here in the interface has a prefix BTN, step 1, BTN. So that means it's a button, so I'm going to go and make that object. Over here in your toolbox, there's a button tool. Double click, drag it to the right spot, name it by scrolling up in the property window, name it BTN step 1. Please make your prefixes lowercase. BTN should be lowercase. The S in step 1 should be capital. Again, that's important so that people can quickly see that the word step is there. And never put spaces or symbols in the name of an object. Okay, we're not finished with that object yet. We must scroll down in the property window and change its text property as well. The text property for the button should be step 1. In this case, with a space in there and a capital S. Now put an and symbol in front of the 1. On your keyboard, Shift 7, put a little ampersand in there. It's called an ampersand. I call it the and sign. That will cause the 1 to be underlined. Let's check it out. Let's click somewhere like on the background of the form, and you'll now see there's a little underline on the 1. You can read about that in the notes or watch a later video. Okay, and finally, my interface tells me to the right of that button to create a label named LBL Step 1, and it should say Design the Interface. So let's go do that. Double-click your label, tool again, drag it to the proper spot, name it LBL Step 1. You're always following the interface sketch. You're always exactly following the specs. Scroll down to the text property and type in there, Design the Interface with a capital D. Hit the Enter or Return key, and it looks pretty good there. Oh, you can change the color of things. Maybe you want Design the Interface to be a different color. I'm going to click that label and go to its forecolor property. 4 is short for foreground, and the letters are in the foreground. So next to forecolor property, change the boring black that was chosen for you, find a custom interesting color, like maybe the school colors, blue, and there you go. Now you know how to change the color of something. You can also play with the background color of an object. Don't do it now, but sometimes having a back color that's interesting will liven up your program a little bit. So I fast forwarded and I've created the other necessary objects on the form in this project. I was very careful to make the objects in the correct order. I made this label at the top, then this button, then this label, then this button, then this label, then this button and this label, and then this button and this button. That is important because later when we run the program and hit the tab key, something called the focus will move around the form. Let's watch. When I run the program, even though right now this program doesn't do anything when I click these buttons, watch what happens when I hit the tab key on my keyboard. That's called the focus, that shaded, that outline. And when it gets to exit, it goes back up to button 1. That is just a logical way of doing things. You'll lose points on a project if you don't have the focus move around the form in a logical way. Anyway, that's the interface. And now I double-click the button numbered step 1. The code window here already provides for me an empty method, in which case I want to type LBL step 1 dot visible equals true. Now when I go back to my interface, I'm going to click on this label and change its visible property from true to false. Now when I run the program, this label doesn't show up. I'm going to do the same thing to the other two labels below it. I'm going to change their visible properties to false. True, they show up here in the design window, but when I run the program, they don't show up. They're invisible when the program begins. Now when I click on this button, that label shows up. These two don't show up because I haven't typed any code behind the scenes. I still have that work to do. Right now, I only have button step 1. When it's clicked, this line of code executes, which means label step 1 becomes visible. Let's go back here, double click this button, and I'm lazy, so I'm going to copy and paste by doing control, copy and paste, but I'm going to be sure to change that 1 to a 2. So that button step 2 click makes label 2 become visible. So as I've now implemented 2 methods, this program will work for 2 of the 3 steps of the programming process. I need to double click the step 3 button. That puts my blinking cursor in an empty private sub n sub, where I have to then paste or retype. So in this empty private sub n sub, I'm going to put in the code, changing this 1 here to a 3, so that when button 3 is clicked, label 3 becomes visible. Even though over here in the design window, I emphasize, these 3 labels are currently visible at design time, because I set the visible property to false for all 3 of these, that's why they will be invisible when I run the program. So watch. One more time. I'm running the program. I'm in runtime. These 3 labels are false. Their visible properties are false, so they don't show up. But when I click on these 3 buttons in any order, the corresponding label becomes visible. Hey, look, it's not clearing out when I click this. I wonder why. Oh, I haven't typed any code for the clear button. So I quickly double click that. Now, how can I make something go invisible? Well, maybe I type something like LBL step 1 dot invisible equals true. No, that doesn't work. That's a compile error. It's squiggly underlined. There is no invisible property. So I change invisible to visible. I know that works, but instead of true, I make it false. And I do that for the other 2 buttons or the other 2 labels rather, in that same clear click private sub n sub. Being careful to change that 1 to a 2 and this 1 to a 3. Now when I run the program and click the clear button, all 3 of the buttons will become invisible, because visible equals false makes something invisible. Let's test it. So far so good. Okay, so far so good. Now the moment of truth, I click the clear button, and yes, they all go invisible. Hey, look at this. I can run this program over and over again because I have a clear button. It's always good style to have a clear button in a program for the user's convenience. Now exit doesn't work, but that one's easy. To exit a program, of course you double click the button, and it puts your blinking cursor where it needs to be, and you simply type application.exit. That's the command you should just memorize because you'll need it in virtually every program you write. Application.exit with empty parentheses. I always like a blank line below that n sub there so that every private sub n sub has a blank line above it and below it. Don't worry about these gray lines that separate things, but you should have blank lines in between each private sub n sub and the other private sub n sub, which by the way are called methods. At the top you should put your name and everything in the style that I've taught you in class. Your name, such as John Doe. You should type the name of the project, which in this case it's called 3 steps. And you should also type what class period you have Mr. Minnick with. And then a blank line there also for good style. There you have it. There's the code window. And of course, here's the interface. Have a great day.